the definition of attribute, indicator, and metric in chorus from memory at this point. But this is some of the shared language that I think has been really helpful. When we started talking about attributes, I found it a really unwieldy word, and I wasn't sure why it was in the executive order, which probably Chandra knows at least. But we've grown into it, right? And this idea that we have these traits of climate resilience that operate at a really high level that can be applied statewide that help us think of these big picture goals when we say we want to build more climate resilient lands and waters. What are some big elements? What are some big kind of buckets or chunks of that that help us think about that with more specificity? And then the executive order lays out some quantitative goals that we knew the quantitative part before we even knew what we were applying them to, right? And so the goal is to step those down to eventually metrics that we can track and show progress over time, that we can define a baseline and that we have either data available or proxies for data available that we would be able to show our work, show how each agency contributes to these goals with our different missions and mandates and funding sources, showing how that connects to the work of partners, partner governments, nonprofits, everybody that kind of works in this space. And so that's the point of these attributes, and the language I think that we've been using consistently to step down from attribute to indicator to metric has helped us at least use similar terminology, but also stay operating at the same scale as we're talking about pretty complex concepts. So I think that's been really helpful. Bobby, would you go to the next slide, please? So we started out with a memo developed by some of our agency folks at ODFW, OWEB, and the Oregon Consensus team based on a landscape scan of a lot of different similar plans and resources. It had, I forget, 7 or 8 or 9 sort of categories of attributes for us to consider. And through our group process on day one, we started sort of winnowing and lumping and splitting and figuring out how to pare those down to the ones that we thought were most relevant and that we could eventually develop indicators and metrics for. We came out of that day, I think, with 5 or so pretty roughly defined ones. Did a little bit of synthesis that night with a small group. And then when, as Bobby said, when we came back yesterday, our focus in the morning was to hear from partners in tribal government. And so we heard a number of key themes that felt like they needed to be brought more to the surface or be addressed more explicitly based on that feedback from our sovereign tribal partner staff. And so some of those themes, folks who were in the room or online will remember, were around process and making sure that we were looking at the key sort of ecological and social processes that drive some of these attributes and indicators. Making sure that we were really featuring water quality and quantity, which was a little nested in there, but maybe not as explicit. And so when we started working on this again yesterday afternoon, I think each of the groups really made an effort to bring forward all of these concepts, but to start thinking both through an upland and a water lens at a lot of the ecological attributes that we were talking about. Reciprocity was a very common theme of that. And so we'll talk more about sort of how reciprocity and the idea of stewardship and the interaction between people and nature came through here, and I think has continued to build. It was actually a really common theme in our first draft set and is getting, I think, more and more sort of nuanced in the way that we draw that out in the I feel like I'm building tension around draft attributes that you'll see in a moment, but they're also in your printouts. Yeah, you do a drum roll. Debbie will say it. So yesterday we sat down with 4 or 5 pretty solidly, made some updates. We'll talk you through those now. You've got the results in the paper in front of you. And as Bobby said, there's a lot of text. So we're gonna ask, Debbie is going to give us the high level version verbally. Don't get lost in the 9-point font so that you don't hear what Debbie's saying. We're going to sort of step down through those and highlight some of the key ideas that evolved through the conversations of the last couple days. And then today, we're going to be asking folks, both agency representatives and other folks in the room who wear a implementation or a land management hat, to help us think through like what's resonating in this and what might we change, but also what do you think you can contribute, and what might you ask of other folks around you, other partners or political bodies to be able to make progress towards these attributes and be able to show our work. So that's the conversation we'll be focusing on today. So as we're talking about these, be aware that we will be asking you questions about them in fairly short order, both how they're resonating with you, and then later in smaller work groups, sort of how can you help and what help might you need to be able to start implementing some of this stuff. Does that sound right?
Okay. Yes.
Take
all
it
right.
away.
Here we go. Next slide. So one of the things that we realized as we've gone through these conversations is that so I'm going to show you two things. I'm going to show you the attributes kind of written as sentences, just kind of like read them through. Because for us that were in the room yesterday, we were wordsmithing till the end. And so this is the first time that we've seen it all in one. So, and then we're going to show you a graphic that kind of represents some of the interconnectedness of these attributes. So again, we're talking about resilient lands and waters. And so what are the attributes that provide for resiliency? So here goes. Resilient lands and waters have connectivity within and across land, sea, water, and sky, diverse and complex habitats, species, landscapes, and aquatic systems that provide options for responding to change and disturbance, have space, time, and capacity for ecological processes to support and reinforce ecosystem function, have capacity to sustain communities, lifeways, and livelihoods. And another attribute is that people, nature, and environment, including lands and waters, are resilient together in place-based relationships. And again, all of these attributes are interconnected. And I think that really shows up in the beautiful graphic that Alexa and others pulled off last night. And so again, you'll see kind of around the outside, this notion of people and environment are resilient together. And that's like, I think Bobby calls it the big warm hug, right? Around the attributes. And then you can see the four attributes that I just said out loud shown in the circle, and that there really is this continuum and this relationship across all of them to feed into resiliency. And so as you get even into this next piece where we're talking about indicators, we recognize that this is really a Venn diagram of attributes, that there's going to be indicators that we identify that speak to more than one of these as we go through this process. But combined, these are the attributes that if you're looking at a geography and you see these attributes, that's probably a landscape that's going to be pretty resilient into the future. And that's what we were shooting for. So I'll hand it to Sarah. We're going to kind of go through, there's a lot of detail on the next couple of slides. So we're going to hit some of the highlights for each of these attributes. And then we're also going to give anybody that's been working with us for the last 2 days, just like if there's anything we miss or anything you just want to kind of, highlight that on each of these, we'll give you a chance to jump in.
And Sarah, just before you start, as you're thinking of things, as you're hearing Debbie and Sarah talk, feel free to just start writing that down on your paper while the thought is fresh.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I think I'm not gonna read this. The fascinating thing I think about the process we've been through is, let's see, 1 million years ago on Tuesday afternoon, we were down to like 5 words. It was like connectivity, diversity. There was a debate about redundancy. We thought about having a little battle over some of those. And so we had really simplified down, and then we started sort of rebuilding more complexity and nuance into the language that we were using. So we're well aware, like, don't wordsmith the language because it's all been kind of created overnight as it was, in each step in this workshop. or brushed up overnight. So we probably will, I think, go back through a phase of like, let's winnow and simplify our language again and make sure it's as streamlined and plain as possible. But now we've kind of hit this point where we're trying to make sure that all of the key concepts in each of these attribute areas are in there. And so yesterday afternoon, we broke into groups to each work on one of these. And I was only in one of those conversations. So it's going to be very difficult for me to report back on all of them. So I am going to say a few words on each and then ask like one person in the room, maybe who was in that group, to say something that shares a little richness about our conversation. So the first one started as a word about connectivity. And then we started sort of, I think, with the normal, okay, wildlife corridors and linkages, and what about the connectivity that riparian areas provide? And then you can start to see, even just in the description of the attribute, we tried to develop each of those attributes into more of a descriptive phrase. Resilient lands and waters are full sentence rather than just having a word, which you can read a lot or a little into. So some of the key concepts that have developed under this connectivity attribute are that it involves both structural and functional components. So the physical structure of the landscape that allows sort of habitat features to develop that might facilitate movement of mobile or sort of evolving, what do you call that? Adapting species that are moving on the landscape through generations. And then also functional connectivity that really is more about not only the movement of organisms, but also ecological processes. And so I think the group that worked on connectivity yesterday was starting to include things like the nutrient cycle and the idea of a permeable landscape rather than just one connected by linear corridors. So I'm not going to try to talk through the indicators, in part because I can't see them at all. But the idea is that we could start, we brainstormed like everything that we possibly could that you could break down into indicators. And then we know that we're going to be limited in our ability to find data or proxies or to actually measure some of this stuff. So the goal is kind of with the next step after this workshop to start winnowing that set of indicators. But right now, if you kind of sit and think and look through those, it gives you a much richer idea of what we mean by that connectivity sentence. Okay, those indicators show like what are the nuts and bolts that connectivity is made up of in land and waters of the state. Does somebody that worked with the connectivity group want to add anything to that? Or just people who care about connectivity? It's also fine. I'm not looking for comprehensive, but one more idea to share with the group. Just grab a mic. Go ahead.
The only other thing I would highlight is the fact that, you know, we need to preserve connectivity both within our unfragmented landscapes as well as within our urban environments. So making sure that we're capturing that urban piece as well with things like stepping stones and riparian corridors and greenways, in addition to maintaining the permeability of some of our more intact landscapes.
Great, thank you. The next attribute that we worked on, Bobby, can you switch this to diversity? We used to have two attributes that were diversity and complexity. And when we tried to step those down to indicators, we got badly lost. I will speak for myself anyway. And it turns out that all of the attributes are connected. The connection between species and habitat diversity and structural complexity was so great that they kind of merged and we went kind of swirling whenever we tried to describe them separately. And so we worked, this was my group yesterday, so I have more things to say, but I still welcome anyone else from our small group to weigh in. We started thinking about those building blocks of like, okay, both in aquatic and what do you call landy systems? Aquatic ecosystems and the other kind, terrestrial, thank you. It's been a long couple of days. The things above the aquatic things. That we have this sort of stepping stones, building blocks of structural complexity, which could be like stream morphology, or it could be like the complexity of the physical landscape, going up to habitat complexity, which might include things like vegetation structure or just the sort of mosaic of different habitats and microhabitat types on the landscape. Species diversity builds from that, and then all of that really connects directly back to adaptive capacity, which then we got kind of stuck in a loop where we're like, wait, that's climate resiliency. We just kind of bit our own tail. But that's the goal, right? Is that ends up being that resiliency thing in the middle of the circle of the graphic that we just looked at. So those were some key ideas that came out. There's some notes in the attribute description, I think, of each of these of some other conversations that we had that we might want to loop in. Does anyone else from the diversity group want to share a thought before we move on?
Nailed it.
Really?
Yep.
Okay. It was a small group. Easy to sum up. Very well aligned. Kirsten, did you want to add something? I knew if I gave you
didn't
enough
want to
time,
leave
you'd
you
get
alone.
in
You're
there.
almost, you're looking at
It's okay
me
because
like,
we're giving people time to think because we're going to start asking them questions
I
about
really-
this very
I just-
soon.
you did a beautiful job and thank you so much. I just want to appreciate that, colleagues mentioned of the urban environments very much because I've been struggling. We're going to get to later, like who's not here. And it's really, since, it's really the local governments, housing and development interests. So I just appreciate that, and I'll mention it again later. So thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kirsten. Okay, so the next attribute was ecological processes. And this started out late Tuesday as an adaptive capacity slide. And then we hit the same loop. We were like, wait, have we just redefined climate resilience? And we have this internal loop that we can get out of now. So with feedback from our tribal government partners, we started to orient ourselves towards this attribute being more focused around ecological processes. And I think from my understanding that what was really resonating with folks when this was differently framed was having space for disruptive processes, which can be positive, as we talked about yesterday, like fire and flood, to have some space to absorb, adapt, I forget what the three words are that are behind me, on the landscape. And following the conversation with our tribal government partners, we added in a lot more ecological processes and brought that process lens. So the processes that build water quantity and quality, still talking about fire and flood, nutrient cycle, carbon cycle. And I know, yesterday, Anton Kiono from Umatilla Tribes talked a lot about using a process-based lens on restoration, on habitat restoration, and how that was kind of the underpinning of the way that he thought and the Umatilla Tribes Natural Resource Department thinks about achieving some of these resiliency attributes. So that group went through a long journey that I definitely wasn't there for. So can we have one more person from that group talk about the journey to get to this ecological processes attribute? You should feel like veterans of some, protracted conflict because it was it looked to me from the outside, at least, like a challenging conversation. They're looking at each other. That's a good sign.
I feel like there's this, some of us might feel like we've used all of the words that we had for the week at this point. So
I feel that way. And here I am with the microphone, so Andy can do it too.
Yeah, I think in terms of trying to capture some of the conversation, I was not thinking about this when we were having the conversation yesterday. I thought a lot about it on the drive home, but Kelly had said something during the conversation with our tribal governments in the morning around like you can do the physical sort of restoration of an area, but then you have to let the water come back and the river come back, and like so there's an aspect of where like time becomes important for processes to take hold again and do what they need to do. And so part of resilience is not necessarily rushing in to make those decisions and to say this is what this needs to be, but to just allow for that natural decision making and process decision making that happens. So and then I think there's some other stuff where it does come to management about like understanding potential conditions in the future and what something come back to and how climate is going to impact that. But anyway.
Thanks, Andy. I wish I'd been there for that conversation. In case you can't tell, I'm really interested in learning more about it. So the last two attributes were both the human-y stuff, and folks who have been with us will remember there's one of those that's part of the quadrants, and then there's the other that's kind of the warm hug around it of stewardship. And so I think there was a single group that worked on both of those. The one that's in the quadrants, the one that's sort of one of those central resiliency attributes that we can look at lands and waters and help decide whether they are becoming more climate resilient or sort of fostering climate resiliency, was this capacity to sustain communities, lifeways, and livelihoods. And so part of that is basically acknowledging the inherent interconnectedness of people and nature, that we're not just trying to describe land and water resiliency in the absence of people, but that one of the things that we can use to identify a resilient landscape or waterscape is to say, does this have space for humans to connect with, to pursue livelihoods, to build resilient communities and economies? Do we have access to first foods and medicines? Do we have ways to connect natural resource economies and sustain those in a diverse and thriving way over time? The second, I'm going to do these together, and then I will ask somebody from the group to speak up too. The second one is that sort of circular thing around the outside, which is a description of also what it looks like when we have resilient landscapes, is that people are engaging and caring and stewarding and connecting with those. We had a great conversation around access, and the access can be either a positive or a negative feature depending on both intention and how it's managed. And so we've kind of played around with different language in here, and we'll probably continue to evolve that over time. But the overall sense that I think this is meaning to capture is that active stewardship, active management, the positive, caring, constructive interactions between people and nature are what build all of these factors of resiliency. So it's in that interaction between people and lands and waters that we can have either the active management or the creation of space to for processes to evolve that will help foster these over time. I feel like I could describe these better early yesterday, which is a little bit daunting. So either Debbie's right and I'm out of words, or they've just gotten a lot more interesting over time, or both. So who from the human interactions group would like to say a few words about these indicators? Go ahead, Steph.
I'll just mention that the one on the very back, the resilient together and place-based relationships, I think we were trying to capture both that kind of philosophy of a reciprocal relationship, and then some of the feedback that we got from Anton yesterday was CTUIR about the importance of a foundation and law and of those laws being fully implemented.
That's a really good point. That was one of the key features of the conversation yesterday that I neglected to report back. Thanks for that, Steph. Which may be something that we can weave into other attributes as we go forward too. Okay, I know Bobby's going to lead us into a discussion now. I do want to see if we want to just pause and see if folks want to add something in, if there are questions from the group to the group. Questions before we dive into the next discussion? What do you guys think? No, that's the discussion question. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, and Sarah, I think it's a great spot to talk for like clarifying questions, but part of this is like, as we process it, I don't want you processing that toward Debbie and Sarah, because this is ours, not theirs.
We learned from Bobby's facilitation skills. We'll turn it right back around at you.
Yeah. So let's ask clarification questions, like get our head wrapped around this, and then we'll talk about what's missing, what needs to change, other things like that together.
Yeah, so something that had come up on the first day was around the interaction between this and the Plan for Resilient Oregon and the hazard piece of this executive order. And it does seem like to me the capacity to sustain communities, lifeways, and livelihoods could be a direct nexus for that, although we haven't gotten down that road of indicators at all, if that's where that one is headed. but could anyone speak to how?
I mean,
those
it could
two-
be a Venn diagram. I do want to give Jeff or Chandra a chance to speak to that too, because there was a question that came up the first day of sort of how this connects with that community and social resiliency work. So I can see Jeff moving, and Chandra, do you guys want to comment about that at all before we kick it around the room?
I was hoping you hadn't noticed I was.
Give the man a mic. Jeff, you got to use the mic.
I gotta use the mic.
Yeah, you really do. Try not to hurt anybody.
I'll lean in. And Chandra, oh, you're there. And can you talk without a coughing fit? You wanna grab it? You want me to?
Yeah, no, well, I guess I can start, Jeff, if you want to finish. But what I can say is the attributes process was really connected to the natural and working lands and waters, driving those actions. The community resiliency actions in the executive order and the plan for resilient Oregon, what we were anticipating was that we weren't going to necessarily be inconsistent or incompatible in the things we are advancing in different parts of the executive order. But the plan for resilient Oregon is, as you've all noted, much broader and is proceeding on a different trajectory that is a little bit outside of what you're all doing in this room right now. It's a community-driven plan, as you all know, that's currently in development. And so I guess my expectations or our expectations were that the attributes process would be really connected to driving the 10 by 10 actions and the keeping working lands working actions as well.
Yeah, I think very definitely the Resilient Oregon piece is a more organic, community-based, bottom-up, what do you need in your community, and not really necessarily tying to what another community might be doing. So we really had not seen the attributes as an overlay for that. And then the forestry piece, catastrophic wildfire, that's got a statutory overlay already. And there's a plan that is part of that. We hadn't discussed the application of the attributes to that piece of things, but it is, I don't think you should feel like it has to be encompassed.
But there are points of connection, I think was
Very definitely.
part of Christina's point. So if other folks want to reflect on those, I didn't mean to shut down the conversation. I just knew we had flagged that as a place where we're looking for more information.
I think more broadly, there's a lot of co-benefits across health and hazards and so many things. I mean, yesterday there was a comment about wanting to capture some of the co-benefits. Is there a way you want to do that today, or is that something we do after the meeting?
I guess for me, there's no such thing as co-benefits. It's just a benefit, right? So if there's something like that, like yesterday, the conversation was around carbon cycle. So like carbon storage and stability, and it was framed as like that was a co-benefit in the executive order. You'll notice that as a potential indicator on the ecological process side. So if there's something that's important to you, make sure that we're flagging that on the indicator side or in the description so we don't lose it, right? They'll have to be filtering and figuring out like what sits where later, but for the workshop purposes, let's just get it there on that far right column. Yeah, Debbie, Sarah? Yeah. Okay, great. Let me pull my slides back up, but this next exercise is gonna ask you to start reflecting on everything you just heard from Debbie and Sarah, everything you're seeing in that draft diagram, everything you're seeing in the tables. And we're going to do that a little bit individually first. So before I give you the reflection questions, I do want to know what's in your brain. So if you're writing your thoughts and reflections on your own notes that you got to take home, that's cool, but doesn't help us. So you'll notice that Robin and I handed out worksheets, look kind of like this. You know, we've been using Post-its all day long, whether it's on a worksheet, whether it's on a Post-it, whether it's on your own piece of note paper with your name on it that you're going to hand back to us. I don't much care as long as your name's on it and I get it. All right. So whatever you're going to reflect on, just make sure it's in a form where I know how to find you when I can't read your writing and that I get something physical in my hands. Okay. Hold on. Okay, so this next bit, let's just take about 5 minutes and the OWEB and ODFW team kind of define these 4 kind of reflection questions. So as you look at the 5 attributes, both their descriptions and the indicators, what's resonating, what's missing, what should we change, what else would you like us to know? Take about 5 minutes and just kind of write down as much as you're thinking right now. So don't overthink it, just get us the high level concepts. And then I'm gonna ask you to, right after that 5 minutes, is turn to a neighbor that doesn't work for the same agency as you, and just share what you found. And then I'm gonna ask those neighbors to share it back with the full group. What are some of the themes that we're coming up with? Okay, clear enough? All right. And for folks online, Chandra, I'll pick on you because I know you've got audio. I think you should have access to the attribute tables and everything to do this online, yeah?
Yeah, we have the slides. Yes.
Perfect. And so feel free just in chat, if you have something you want to provide back to us via chat, that's great. Or if you wanted to send me an email and we'll push out my email on chat, we can get it that way too. Anybody else need a worksheet copy? If you need a second sheet of paper, I've got that too. to comment on the overall structure of the diagram, any particular language in the attribute, what the attributes are, any of the indicators in the far right column, and then organize your thoughts enough that you feel like you can share them with a neighbor. And also a reminder, this is not your last chance, so don't stress about it too much either. It's like you'll have other opportunities to poke at these, but get as much as you can down. All right, gigglers. I think we're done on this one. Take your worksheet and your notes and find someone who doesn't think like you. You don't know what's in someone else's brain. That's okay. Just pick the closest person. So just let's go ahead and pair off. The biggest thing is don't pick someone that you work with every day. Try and find someone you don't know very well. So find a pair, take 5 minutes, share what you found out. If someone is saying something that's really resonating with you and changes your mind, perfect. For folks online, this is not going to work that great for you. Feel free to mute us, and then we'll come back to you in about 5-10 minutes. It's happened like 3 times. Let's not record. We don't need to record just yet. Okay. I'm curious a little bit how that conversation went. It'd be good just to go around and just hear from some pairs on, again, what was resonating, what's missing, what should we change, what else would you like to know? Is there a pair that'd like to go first and talking to us? You mean I'm so excited because I learned so much.
Yeah,
that I really want to share with everybody.
That too.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
The common one between Kathy and I was that for some of them, there's a lot of indicators with some redundancy, and too many indicators is like too many attributes. It's not useful. So there's a number of them. The ecological processes one jumped out to me where it's like we could consolidate or trim down some of these indicators.
Did you start crossing some out?
No, we didn't get that far.
Okay, that's cool.
But you know,
invitation, you're welcome to.
We have the concept of a plan. And then let's see, another one was that for some of the indicators, coming up with metrics is going to be like very complex or just not possible to measure qualitatively or quantitatively. So when thinking about like how to consolidate or trim or alter indicators, we'd want to be like, okay, are we just gonna, have this be kind of a qualitative idea indicator, or are we looking for something that we can measure specifically? And then anything particular for you?
In general, I'd say this is resonating. it's headed in a great direction. And so kudos to all the work everybody's done. One of the things that we talked a little bit about in terms of what's missing is just that what we're envisioning is a pretty big cultural change. And we don't really have a lot of cultural indicators. I mean, there's governance and there's some elements there, but maybe that needs a little more attention. And then we just talked about the incentives and disincentives for how we make decisions in the private sector and in the public sector. And, how do we address some of that? So that's another couple of things, but the rest of mine are really wordsmithing kinds of things.
But you wrote down the wordsmithing parts, right, Kathy?
I did.
Nice. Thank you.
Me.
Well, that's invitation. Wordsmith away on your notes so we don't lose that. And same thing, if you're noticing some of those indicators, it's like, I don't see how y'all are going to get metrics for that. Feel free to let us know that too. Troy, you want to go next? This is not volunteer by default. Again, you want to share what's so cool in your head.
I think one of the things Herb and I really are kind of interested in, had some consensus on, is like, once we get to operationalizing this thing, right? This part was pretty easy because we're just doing principles and there's no work that needs to get done yet. So we all agree. So tearing that down to metrics, contextualizing that to the ecoregion and then to the specific landscapes and the land use that's going to persist in those places. There's still a lot of hard work, I think, ahead of all of us there. I felt like we siloed ag and tribes into the people attributes that how they're laid out here. And I think that's just a simple product of us all like kind of living in our wheelhouses. But we spent hours talking with the tribes yesterday and coming to a realization that like tribal practices are ecological processes. And then we didn't incorporate any indicators at all in that. So I thought we missed the mark there. Similarly, in the diversity and complexity attribute, maybe there would be indicators like that it supports traditional ecological practices across all 4 seasons or some appropriate number of seasons, or that tribal and cultural significant species are appropriately present in that landscape for the diversity and complexity. And then I love the diagram and I love visuals, and I think we have a tendency to latch on and leverage those because they communicate things so easily. I think it'll be important for us to be mindful of the message in that we're not trying to say that these 4 things are the silver bullet to resiliency. Like that's what we can do and the lens that we look through as the people in this room, but there's a lot more to it than that. And so I think we should be mindful of that while also saying I really, really like it. So that's what I got. Got anything else?
Hey, Troy, can I just ask?
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by the we siloed tribes and agriculture into the people part. Can you, like, where would be an example of where you would integrate it somewhere in one of the other attributes?
Yeah, so like in the diversity and complexity attribute, maybe there would be an indicator that says that this landscape supports traditional ecological practices across all 4 seasons, or some appropriate number of seasons for that landscape, or that tribally or culturally significant species are appropriately present in that landscape. And then in the space-time capacity for ecological processes to support and reinforce ecosystem function attribute, I mean, we learned a lot about how the tribes view their practices and their traditions as ecological processes, right? And how like the harvesting of camas contributes to the function of the camas beds. And so it seems like there's an opportunity to include really specific indicators. You can connect the dots on some of these, right? But like we learned so much yesterday that I feel like maybe we probably shouldn't have to connect too many dots.
I'll just just add for farms or agricultural systems. And I'm a little over my skis on this, but if you look up what's a resilient farm, it includes diversity. So there could be something like that in terms of diversity of products or markets. So that might be another place.
Great. Yeah. While those things are fresh, write them right down. You can, if it's something you can see, Robin has just kind of put some of those two things in green so we don't lose them. If there's something like that you might have written down on your worksheet that might be something we just put in our live notes right now, feel free to just write it on a Post-it and hand it to Robin or myself. John.
I mean, I think to keep going with that kind of that conversation and that thread, that was, I'll admit I wasn't here the last 2 days, and so either I have the benefit or the annoyance to the group of kind of coming in with not that whole background knowledge. But I mean, one of the things that really jumped out at me was there's almost too many attributes, and I get that might just be a product of the process, but there's more than 3 gets really complicated to remember, implement, and string together. But on that one, I felt like there's a structural kind of almost danger to decoupling the human, the tribe components from the other attributes. And I kind of like that conversation about trying to bring these more closer aligned and in harmony, because it's like when we look at this one, right, like kind of ignoring the impact of our own species, our own habitat, our own working landscapes within this section, I think almost makes it a dangerous divide between the two. And it doesn't allow us then, when we come to those metrics, when we come to those indicators, to actually bring them together and be able to have these cross-cutting metrics and ability to say, okay, hey, because we're connecting working lands and because we're connecting habitats, it's all flowing through them, because now all of a sudden they live in different attributes. And so I think there's just a little bit of an issue there. And then, kind of what Jane and I were talking about, just, kind of going in the same direction, is just a little bit more maybe precision and clarity on some of the language. I get on the attribute side, it's going to be bigger, and we have the funnel down. But when it comes to, words like capacity, sustain, right? Like if we're going to eventually prescribe metrics to those, we're going to have to be really precise in what those mean, because I could walk out of here and think, well, sustaining fish population means exactly what it is today. So no more fish in the stream, we're good, we've sustained it. Whereas I guarantee Debbie and my ODFW friends are like, whoa, no, like we're talking growth, prosperity, additionality here. And so when we talk about these things, I think we just need a little bit more precision, either in the attribute language or as we further funnel down.
Yeah, and I would ask, as you are searching for some of that precision, and then Troy, you also made me remember, is like our goal here is to not be implicit about anything. We want to be explicit about what's embedded within other issues. And then so as we're searching for that precision, we want to be careful it doesn't create silos or barriers. But if there is information or ways of articulating something that creates a bridge across an issue that you really want to, think about how you can articulate it that way. Does another pair wanna go? Okay. See back here, and then I'll come over here. You got a mic, okay?
For me?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm kind of doing the triple of us here. And we talked quite a bit about the importance of being, there's been a lot of emphasis on place-based relationships, and a lot of the work that we're talking about is really place-based, but we don't have really great inventories of some of the places that we might need to be protecting, like wetlands and other types of features. So just the importance then of being able to expand our base understanding of place so that we can make sure that we are doing protections and prioritizing work and quantifying change in the most relevant locations. And under ecological processes, we don't really talk about habitat forming processes with specificity. We talk about diversity of environments and of available environments for different life stages, but the disturbance processes that create successional features in our rivers and on our landscapes, we can have more specifics about that. For example, the lack of early colonization environments post-flooding, because we just don't have quite as, we have a lot of dams, we don't have the type of flooding that we used to have that created those kinds of sandbars and other features. So, so some more specifics for probably in that attribute metrics discussion. And also thinking about linking the metrics, and this is probably a forward-looking thing as our agencies start to look at the metrics that we would want to be able to develop, make sure that those allow for some kind of change component so that they're not a static metric. If we're going to be looking at how systems are changing in relation to climate or in response to the management that we're doing, make sure that that change element is captured in the type of metric that we're quantifying, and also to link those indicators to specific management goals, so that again we aren't just collecting data with metrics for the sake of data, so that that data can specifically inform metrics that are going to be tied to management goals through the indicators to allow for more functional adaptive management down the line. Did I capture it, guys? Thanks.
Nice. And then for Steph and Sarah and Alexa and Sarah and Debbie, if you're hearing things that you need more clarity on so that you know how to take it and write it or follow up, we make sure you just ask. All right, cool. Kirsten, did you want to go?
Yeah. Thank you. I guess starting out in terms of what resonates or what I think we've gotten right from a aquatic perspective, I think the connectivity and diversity of habitats is on point. The one thing that I think we could maybe add to is some sort of measure of fragmentation or lack of fragmentation in habitat. I think it's in there somewhere, but spelling it out specifically, I think would be beneficial. And then the thing that I think others have hinted at from day one that I just can't stop thinking about is sort of the inherent tensions between like land use management practices and ecological benefit. So coming from the water perspective, it's tough to have a great balance where folks are, you know, having productive agriculture and there's enough water left in the stream for fish and wildlife. I think there are better balances on the terrestrial side, but from a like an actual water quantity budget perspective, it's tough to find that balance.
Thank you. And Spencer said it in the positive, so it might be another way of saying that is intact large landscapes. You had said around the non-fragmentation. It's just a beautiful, because you can really see that creates a visual. Something for me that's missing is innovation, you know, allowing for innovation. I guess I'll just leave it there. I think probably this afternoon we'll have some ideas of encouraging innovation, you know, so that's state agencies can't do that alone. So that those partnerships at the watershed basin, you know, community scale will be really important. Setting up structures that go well beyond even the 10 years and maybe we think about 100 years, you know, what are social structures and ways of engaging that we could lay now that could persist and support folks to do the right thing, whether they be property owners or land managers. I think that's probably, I should put down the microphone at this juncture. Thank you.
Other things from pairs that haven't come up yet? Maybe from other folks who aren't state agencies?
This is a bit more about sort of implementation, but looking at everyone from in the room, different state agencies, different partners, we all have different strengths And instead of looking at how we implement this just by our own agency or what we manage, kind of identifying what we can bring to the table for everybody, I think is a good lens. So PRD, we have access to a lot of people, so we could have the people component, but we also manage a lot of lands, but we need help from ODF for forestry or ODFW for fishing wildlife. So looking at this implementation statewide and using all of our expertise to help our sister agencies or partners as well.
Were you all able to write down some of those things like, okay, we have this collective land base, how can we manage it collectively? Or we've got the ability to organize people, here's how we can deploy those people. Awesome.
And at the risk of expanding this even further, I'm picking up on Kirsten's earlier comment in that one. Who else do we need? Like I'm struggling. I don't think the 14 natural resource agencies on their own are going to be the keys to success here. There may be other agencies that we need to integrate into how we're thinking about this. And so how do we do that? I think was one of the things that came up for me.
Were there particular people you were thinking about?
Well, Kirsten touched on some of it earlier: housing, economic development, transportation. Well, ag's here, but those were some of the things, the ones that come to mind for me.
And then, thank you, right, local government, Bobby, for sure, but also Business Oregon is mentioned in the executive order. So I'm excited to think about the financial incentives in other ways.
I think a couple things that we reflected on were one, in terms of what's resonating. This is like there's a lot of depth in this and a lot of comprehensiveness. And I just think that what was compelling and resonating to me is like a lot of the last couple of days to me have been largely arranging information exercises and like generally consensus. Like no one was like, nah, connectivity shouldn't be part of this, right? Like, so there was just like, we've all kind of been in the same ballpark, to use that expression, like most of the week, which I thought was like we're on, like, when have you ever been in that space, right? Like that's pretty, so I think that's compelling. I think Crystal like brought up like you should, but the jargon piece, I thought that was really.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that. So here, maybe move this over. There we go. So something that I was just thinking about, and this will be when we really dive into metrics and attributes a bit more, but just seeing that there are maybe some terms, some buzzwords, some jargon that we normally float around a lot, especially in agencies. Maybe we have a program name, something that we're used to talking about, and maybe that's not here. So we need to make sure that those things show up. Like green infrastructure was something that I thought would maybe make it on the indicator list, and it hasn't made it there yet. So that would be something to look for. Explicitly calling out groundwater, I think would also be really helpful. Sequestration, I know a lot of us on earlier days talked a lot about carbon sequestration. Of course, carbon cycling has already shown up here, but would it be helpful to actually use that word specifically? I think those were some of the main ones. And natural hazards was another term that we're kind of all used to thinking about. I don't know if there's a place for it. We did have a lot of disturbance processes specifically called out, but does that term need to show up there somewhere? So I think that would be something just for agency folks to maybe bring forward. If there is some jargon, some terminology that needs to be in there, that would be helpful.
And one of the things that would be good for us to at some point figure out, and we did talk quite a bit yesterday, it came up a little bit, Crystal, is whose jargon for which purpose, right? So like carbon sequestration, we had a particular conversation around that and went towards kind of stability and storage and themes that moved a little bit towards ecological language. And there's some language that has specific meanings in kind of ecology, like regime change. We chose not to use that word. things like natural hazards. There we had a big conversation on how disturbance is a good thing in a lot of ways, and so we didn't want to kind of evoke negative connotation there. And so each set of words is going to have different meaning to different people, and we're trying to talk across lots of different audiences. We don't want to lose the precision of going fully to plain language, but we do want to be able to translate across different jargons. So that's going to be something I think for us to be thinking about when we get closer to how this stuff gets used. So thanks for bringing that up, Crystal. Yeah, Steph.
I think one of the goals of the attributes is to help all of us think about what could we be doing beyond business as usual? Because I think most agencies are already doing a lot in support of resiliency, but how do we go beyond what we're currently doing? So I think we both talked about some different ways that the attributes give us ideas on how to do that. I think you mentioned, Tim, just thinking beyond ODF's responsibility and just more of a landscape scale across ownerships. And I was thinking, yeah, kind of what do the attributes help think about additional ways that OWEB could support enhanced connectivity beyond what we currently do? So yeah, I feel like there's a lot here to help us in different ways think about how to go above and beyond what we're already doing. Tim, anything you want to add?
Yeah, there's a lot of specificity in all the indices, and looking at it, boiling it down to good stewardship, and how can one action multiply and move forward a bunch of the indicators consistently instead of at the expense of others. As we have different programs, they're generally focused on one thing. How could they complement each other or be a multiplier moving forward? So that's I'm on the operational side of the equation, but looking at here, how would I implement it? Does this allow me? And that's kind of the lens was looking through the list.
Nice. And gold stars for you two as a pair, because that's the next thing we want to try and ask you all as small groups is okay, this was a check on what's missing in the attributes. Are we generally in the right ballpark? Because then the next big thing is, how is this going to help you as agencies and managers do your job different, better? And so that's the conversation we're getting really close to moving into. And then Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on some thoughts that have been floated out recently, and getting to what you were just touching on, Brian, but we are trying to come to an actionable outcome on a tight timeline. But I think I'd like to also make sure we're kind of thinking also about where are we bumping into, barriers or constraints, or maybe kind of easy fixes that just really aren't in place yet, and kind of have that conversation follow up, where we find define our metrics, we can't do that, and why. I also want to bring to mind the idea of thinking about this as defining it as a process that can be revisited. We are putting out what we think is going to work, but it's important that it's revisited about how the plan is working, how metrics are working, and that we take that information to refine it in different iterations.
All right, so in just a minute here, Jeff, I'm gonna invite you to come up, but let me just check in with the group on something here real quick. Jeff has to leave in a bit, so I wanted to ask him to come up and talk about some of the questions you all had for agencies and thinking about next steps and such. Anything else that we want to try and bring up? Because we'll hear from Jeff, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back into small groups to see okay, where do you in your agency see yourself in these attributes? Where can we talk about some of these bridging things? Where are some barriers that you're already anticipating or currently experiencing that could be easy fixes? If you imagine using these attributes, what could you do different or better?
Jason had a hand up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So I would be remiss not saying something in my current position, working on climate mitigation, but also I was a former researcher in climate resilience who's moved into this mitigation space. And I feel like it's worth emphasizing that most of these resilience efforts or actions that we're potentially talking about all affect the carbon cycle. And I really want to emphasize that resilience is climate mitigation. And I think it's really worth emphasizing that, at least on a very broad scale of this, because more resilient landscapes sequester more carbon, protect more carbon, and reduce the pressure on having to do additional resilience measures in the future. Because as we've seen from the land-based net carbon inventory, ODF's recent report with American Forests on carbon emissions in the future, given projections of climate change, we really need to increase resilience on the landscape to reduce emissions and to increase storage. Otherwise, we're going to really miss. Oh, yeah. She has our report right there. Thank you. Anyway, I just wanted to give this sort of larger messaging side, in addition to seconding the idea of adding sequestration in there if possible, if it's not too nitpicky in the carbon cycle thing. But thank you.
Oh, you mean putting sequestration back where it's in the ecological process piece?
Yeah.
So like storage, sequestration, stability. Yeah. Okay, great. Jeff, you want to come up and talk to us a little bit about what happens next? Or Sarah, Debbie, any other kind of setup or questions that you want to give Jeff?
No, Jeff's good. I mean, maybe Debbie's, yeah, my brain is full.
I wish I could have spent more time. Just the pieces that I've heard of this morning, I think I used the word magical when I opened this up a couple of days ago. Things like this can create magical outcomes, and I'm a real believer in it. And the snapshots I just heard prove that point, I think. And Debbie and Sarah both been talking to me about some of the just amazing material that's come out of this. And so thank you again. In terms, and by the way, we have a prosperity officer. I think we should have a resiliency officer in the state of Oregon personally. But this is a tool that is going to have a lot of useful utility for individual agencies to pick up and pull from to make the case in a stronger way, in a more cogent, coherent way than we can when we're 14 agencies and 32 boards and 2.8% of the budget, right? That's our constant challenge as agencies in Oregon. And so that was the intent. And so the intent is not to have these indicators be the end product, but rather be an input into ODFW or DSL or DEQ's construction of policy option packages for the legislature, budget proposals to the governor, realignment of programs to accomplish more of what, and have a rationale behind the why this is important to realign in order to position ourselves going forward. The executive order really was intended to give agencies more authority to speak on behalf of the administration when advocating for what would make a difference if they were to push programs forward in a way that others might not be pushing them to move forward. So it's an implementation tool, and in that context, we have already begun to meet with the agency directors and the cabinet folks to talk about budget preparation. That's already started for the next biennium, believe it or not. And the instructions that have gone out to every agency is no new funds. You cannot have an agency requested budget that's going to ask for new funds in 2027 unless you have an executive order that you're fulfilling. So the governor's been really clear, and there are about 3 executive orders that are on that list, and this is one of them. So this is the immediate use of this is a point of reference when an agency is saying we could use a little more funds to do this because it would make a difference. And we're pulling, and I'm just going to pick a number. If there's 15 indicators, we're pulling these 3 that this program would would advance. And here's why it's important to advance these three in the context of an executive order. And it gives us that space to advocate for you. And that's what Chandra and Amy and I intend to do, is to advocate for us continuing to make forward progress. Next steps, I think there's refinement. Am I right? There's a lot of refinement that will be done. And hear from some more people. Then there's an agency leadership team that is charged with helping the implementation of the executive order. There's the director's cabinet that meets twice a month, where every director sits down with our office and we have agenda items in a room where we can just talk open and honestly about what can work and where we need to go. And so we'll move it into that space after the leadership team finishes this work. And we are today working on scheduling our third retreat for a half a day, where we have every director of a natural resource agency and the chair of their board or commission come in and spend a half a day in this room. I think we did it in this room last time, in this room. And this is going to be the subject of that retreat, along with a couple of how do you deal with open meeting laws and things like that. But this is the primary topic, and that's going to happen at the end of May or the beginning of June. So this is really a setup that is sequentially ordered in order to give us a lot more to work with going into the next session and then beyond. And we are going to be asking the agencies in the budget process what they can leave behind in order to do more in support of the executive order, aside from additional policy option packages. So these indicators are kind of that foundational place where the conversation starts, and it's not the place where the conversation will end. And I guess that's what I want to leave you with. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them. Chandra, you were over my shoulder someplace. If you have an addition, give you a chance.
No addition. You did well.
All right.
Happy to help with questions though if needed.
Thank you. She doesn't always say that to me. Any questions? Okay. Thanks again. I'll leave you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Actually, I'm headed up to EQC, where Chandra and I will be presenting this executive order to the Environmental Quality Commission. We're meeting with every single board and commission doing a presentation. So we're 2/3 of the way through the list, but today's EQC day. All right. Thanks. Oh, no, Annette, what's your question?
Well, kind of picking up on my comment, and that is, are there going to be efforts to reach out beyond the Natural Resource Cabinet agencies and boards and commissions, and what might that look like? It'll be through the directors. Okay.
These two that we were smart enough in the CO to assign these two as the leaders of this process, and not have it come from our office. So I think that is intended. And I don't know what it looks like, but I know that there's intention.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeff. I have to say, I wrote that down. I love this as the kind of the foundational place where the conversation starts. I'm going to use that again, Jeff. Good one.
I think we can hand it back to Bobby, and he's going to tell us about our next set of breakout groups.
All right.
And doing it well.
Me. Thank you. So we're going to take a break first and foremost. So it's 10:20. Folks can, we're going to take a break till 10:35. Again, coffee is just right outside. Tea and snacks are here. Restrooms are around the corner. We're going to come back and we're going to move into breakout tables. I feel like your table alignments are really good, so I kind of don't want to change them too much. And we're going to ask you as small groups to say, where do you see your agency organization yourself in these attributes? And that can get a little bit about what do you see doing different, better, and closer alignment across agencies. And then what is something you could contribute to help the state make progress towards these goals? If it's overcoming an obvious barrier or like some easy actions, or what Jeff just started articulating, things you could leave behind, things you could be doing differently. What support would you request from sister agencies, partners, governor's office? So like what we're talking about with parks is like, I would request help from like an ODF on how I should be looking at my lands, or similarly how I should be talking to the Umatilla tribes on how I should be doing that. Or, you know, how can I talk with private forest owners on how I might be managing public lands differently, or vice versa. Make sense? Sound useful? Good. All right, let's take a break. We'll be back here at 10:35. Thanks everybody, and thanks folks online. We'll be back at 10:35.